I am Shiloh Kinney, 32 years old, the woman my entire family has called a useless filing clerk for the last 10 years. Nobody thought a family barbecue in the Virginia suburbs would end with the sound of snapping bone. When Kyle, my hero cousin who just graduated boot camp, lunged at me with a manic smile, he thought he would crush me into the grass like a rag doll. He didn't know that my reflexes weren't forged at summer camp, but in the kill houses of the Middle East. In the moment he touched me, the air thick with the smell of stale beer suddenly turned to the metallic scent of blood. 6 seconds. That was all the time I needed to turn the family's pride into an unconscious heap at my feet and expose my mother's hypocrisy. Comment, justice, and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own blood. This story is for the black sheep who are tired of bowing their heads. 2 hours before the ambulance sirens cut through the humid Virginia air, I was sitting in my sedan at the end of my mother's driveway. The deep, gravelly voice of a former Navy SEAL host on my podcast was discussing the discipline of silence, the tactical advantage of being underestimated. It was the only world that made sense to me. I looked at the house, a 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn that screamed middle-class American dream. The driveway was already packed with Ford F-150s and oversized SUVs, their bumpers plastered with patriotic stickers that most of the drivers didn't truly understand. I reached for the volume knob and killed the engine. Silence filled the car. I took a breath, holding it for a 4 count, then releasing it. This was the ritual. I had to take off the operator, the Tier 1 specialist who analyzed threat vectors and breach points, and put on the costume of Shiloh, the mousy, single, 30-something administrative assistant who supposedly filed paperwork for a logistics company in D.C. It was the heaviest armor I ever had to wear. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my glasses. They were non-prescription, just another prop to soften my face, to make me look harmless. The air smelled of charcoal, lighter fluid, and roasting bratwursts. But underneath that, I could smell the tension. Walking into the backyard was like walking onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. The noise was overwhelming. Country music was blaring from the patio speakers, competing with the raucous laughter of men holding cans of Bud Light. And in the center of it all, standing by the grill like he had just conquered a nation, was Kyle. He was 22, with a high and tight haircut so fresh his scalp looked raw. He was wearing a tight Marine Corps t-shirt that clung to his chest, making sure everyone saw the muscles he'd built over the last 3 months. He was holding a beer in one hand and a pair of tongs in the other, gesturing wildly as he recounted his time at Paris Island. "I'm telling you, Aunt Linda," Kyle shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "The drill instructors tried to break me. They really tried. But you just gotta have that mental toughness, you know? It's a mindset. Civilians just don't get it." My Aunt Linda and Aunt Sarah were gazing at him with eyes full of adoration, nodding as if he were explaining quantum physics. "Oh, he's so brave," Aunt Linda cooed, touching his arm. "Our little warrior." I stood by the sliding glass door, invisible. A warrior? He had barely finished basic training. He hadn't seen sand, hadn't heard a shot fired in anger, hadn't felt the concussive force of an IED rattling his teeth. He was a boot, a rookie with an ego bigger than his rucksack. But here, in this backyard, he was Captain America. I felt a sudden thirst, a dry scratch in my throat, and slipped into the kitchen to find a drink. The house was cooler, but the air felt heavier, suffocating with the memories of my childhood. I walked to the counter where the drinks were set up. I reached for a glass of white wine, just wanting something to dull the sharp edges of the afternoon. "Put it down." The voice came from behind me, sharp as a whip. I didn't flinch. I never flinched anymore. But I froze. I turned to see my mother, Janet. She was wiping her hands on a floral dish towel, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with that familiar look of disappointment. She stepped forward and physically snatched the glass from my hand. The wine sloshed over the rim, staining her fingers, but she didn't care. "Don't drink that," she hissed, her voice low so the guests outside wouldn't hear. "A woman drinking alone in the kitchen looks cheap, Shiloh. It looks desperate." I'm 32, Mom, I said, my voice quiet, practiced. I just wanted a glass of wine. You want attention, she corrected, placing the glass out of my reach. She nodded toward the window, where Kyle was now laughing, throwing his head back. Look at Kyle. Look at his posture. That is what a man looks like. That is what success looks like. He's protecting this country. And what are you doing? Filing invoices, wearing those baggy sweaters to hide the fact that you can't find a husband. The insult was precise, designed to hurt. She hated my job because she couldn't brag about it at her bridge club. She hated my clothes because they weren't feminine enough. She had no idea that the baggy sweater was hiding a jagged line of scar tissue running along my lower ribs, a souvenir from a botched extraction in Syria 6 months ago. I'm happy for Kyle, I lied. You should be, she snapped, turning back to her potato salad. Now go outside and try to look pleasant. And for God's sake, don't embarrass me today. I walked out the back door, the humiliation burning in my chest, not because her words were true, but because I had to let them land. I had to take the hit. I couldn't tell her that while Kyle was learning how to march in formation, I was leading a team through a night raid. I couldn't tell her that the invoices I filed were actually intelligence reports on terror cells. I needed air. Real air. I skirted the edge of the patio, avoiding eye contact with my cousins, and made my way to the far corner of the yard near the old oak tree. Someone was already there. Grandpa Jim sat in his folding lawn chair, a safe distance from the chaos. He was 75, a Vietnam vet who barely spoke. The family thought he was going senile because he stared into space a lot. I knew better. He wasn't staring at nothing. He was watching everything. He didn't look up as I approached, but he shifted his legs to make room for me. He was nursing a small tumbler of amber liquid. No ice. He's loud, Grandpa Jim grunted, not pointing at Kyle, but we both knew who he meant. He's excited, I offered, leaning against the tree. He's a puppy barking at a leaf, Jim muttered, taking a slow sip. Then he turned his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes were milky with age, but the gaze was piercing. He looked at my hands, which were resting calmly at my sides. No tremors. Knuckles scarred, but relaxed. You good, kid? I'm fine, Grandpa. Shoulders looked tight, he observed. Carrying something heavy. He wasn't talking about luggage. A chill went down my spine. Out of everyone in this family, the old man was the only one who might suspect. He knew the smell of ozone and cordite. He knew that eyes that had seen death didn't look like normal eyes. Just work stress, I said softly. He huffed, a sound that might have been a laugh. He looked back toward the grill. Kyle was now puffing out his chest, pointing to the shiny eagle, globe, and anchor pin he had pinned onto his civilian shirt. A breach of protocol, but nobody here cared. The sun caught the metal, making it flash like a beacon of virtue. I watched that pin shine. It was perfect, untarnished, just like Kyle. Involuntarily, my hand drifted to my side, pressing against the fabric of my shirt. Underneath, the scar felt rigid and hot. A piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter had missed my kidney by an inch. I didn't get a medal for it. I didn't get a party. I got patched up by a field medic in a dark helicopter and was back on rotation 3 weeks later. The family cheered as Kyle flipped a burger into the air and caught it. Let him have his parade, Grandpa Jim whispered, almost to himself. The quiet ones. We know the bill always comes due. I nodded, swallowing the bitterness. I thought I could just stay in the shadows, survive the afternoon, and leave. I didn't know that in less than an hour the charade would be over, and the violence I kept locked away in a box would be the only thing standing between me and the ground. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden shadows across the neatly trimmed grass, but the heat hadn't broken. It clung to my skin, sticky and oppressive, matching the mood radiating from the patio chairs. Kyle had taken center stage again. He was sitting on the edge of a lawn chair, surrounded by my aunts and a few neighbors, dramatically unlacing one of his pristine combat boots. He grimaced, sucking air through his teeth as if he were pulling shrapnel out of his own flesh. Man, he groaned, finally peeling off a thick wool sock to reveal his heel. You guys have no idea. The rucks we did? 12 miles, full gear. My feet were literally bleeding inside my boots. It's brutal. Aunt Linda gasped, covering her mouth with a hand adorned with too many rings. Oh, you poor baby. Look at that blister. Sarah, get the first aid kit from the house. He needs Neosporin. I looked. It was a blister. A small pink bubble of fluid the size of a dime. It wasn't bleeding. It wasn't infected. It was the kind of friction burn you get from breaking in new footwear at the mall. But to them, it was a war wound. It was evidence of his sacrifice. It's fine, Aunt Linda, Kyle said, waving her off with false modesty, basking in the attention. Marines don't complain. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, right? The phrase, a cliché printed on every motivational poster in every recruitment office in America, made my stomach turn. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Unconsciously, I shifted my weight, and a sharp electric jolt shot up my right side, seizing my breath for a fraction of a second. I forced my face to remain blank, forced my lungs to expand slowly against the restriction of the compression bandage hidden beneath my oversized sweater. The memory didn't ask for permission to return, it just kicked down the door. 3 weeks ago, the mountains of Kunar Province. It wasn't a sunny backyard in Virginia. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallowed you whole. My team was moving fast, extracting a high-value asset before the local militia realized we were there. I had taken point. I didn't see the drop. A 10-foot fall into a ravine filled with jagged rocks. I landed hard. The sound was distinct. A dry snap like a dead branch breaking under a boot. 2 ribs, fractured on impact. The pain was blinding, a white-hot poker shoved into my side, but we were in hostile territory. Silence was our only armor. I didn't scream. I didn't groan. I bit through my lip until I tasted iron, pushed myself up, and signaled, "I'm good," to my team leader. We had 5 miles to hike to the extraction point. Every step was agony. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. But I walked. I carried my gear. I carried the weight because that's what the job demanded. There was no Aunt Linda to fetch Neosporin. There was only the mission and the men beside me. Shiloh, Aunt Sarah's voice snapped me back to the present. The mountains vanished, replaced by the smell of charcoal and cut grass. She was looking at me, holding a plate of deviled eggs, a pitying smile plastered on her face. "You're so lucky you don't have to deal with things like that," she said, gesturing vaguely at Kyle's foot. "Kyle is so brave to put his body on the line. I mean, your job. What is it again? Data entry. At least you get to sit in air conditioning all day. No blisters for you, right?" "Right," I said. The word tasted like ash. "Just typing." "Must be nice," Kyle chimed in, smirking as he rubbed his heel. "The civilian life, safe, easy, no drill sergeants screaming in your face." My mother, who had been listening from the doorway, let out a short, derisive laugh. "Easy is what Shiloh does best. She's always chosen the path of least resistance." That was the second strike. The first had been the wine glass. This one was aimed at my soul. And just like that, another memory surfaced, older and deeper than the broken ribs. 10 years ago, the day I left for selection. The day I packed my life into a duffel bag. Terrified and exhilarated, ready to serve something bigger than myself. My father had already passed, and I stood in the hallway, waiting for my mother to say goodbye. To say she was proud. To say, be safe. She hadn't even looked up from her magazine. "You're going?" she had asked, flipping a page. "Yes, Mom. The recruiter is outside." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and hard. "You're not doing this for patriotism, Shiloh. Don't lie to yourself. You're running away. You're doing this because you can't get a man to stay. You're going to the army to hide from the fact that you're a failure as a woman. You're just broken. Broken." The word echoed in my head now, 10 years later, as I stood in this backyard surrounded by people who shared my blood but didn't know my name. They saw a spinster. They saw a disappointment. They saw a coward who chose a desk job because she couldn't handle the real world. My hand trembled slightly. I clenched it into a fist, hiding it in the pocket of my cardigan. The anger was rising, hot and dangerous. I wanted to rip off this sweater. I wanted to lift my shirt and show them the purple and yellow bruising that wrapped around my torso like a corset of violence. I wanted to show them the scar on my shoulder from a bullet graze in Yemen. I wanted to scream, I have bled more for this country in a week than Kyle will in his entire life. But I didn't. Because that wasn't the job. The job was silence. The job was letting them sleep soundly at night, blissfully ignorant of the monsters I fought in the dark. If they knew what I did, if they knew what I was capable of, they wouldn't look at me with pity. They would look at me with fear. And I didn't want my mother to fear me. I just wanted her to love me. I took a deep breath, fighting the sharp stab in my ribs. I needed an anchor, something to hold on to before I lost control. I closed my eyes for a brief second and whispered the words that had gotten me through the coldest nights and the hottest firefights. The words of King David, a warrior poet who knew something about being underestimated by his family. Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. Psalm 144, 1. It wasn't a prayer for peace, it was a prayer for capability. It was a reminder that my scars weren't signs of failure, they were proof of my training. God had forged me in fire, even if my family only saw the ashes. You okay, Shiloh? Kyle asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. You look a little pale. Maybe the heat is too much for you office types. I opened my eyes. The world came back into focus. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the insecurity behind the bravado. I saw a boy playing soldier because he needed validation. I'm fine, Kyle, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Just a little headache. You should put some ice on that blister. Infection can set in fast. He laughed, dismissing me. Yeah, thanks for the tip, Dr. Shiloh. I turned away, walking back toward the edge of the yard where Grandpa Jim was still watching. I gently pressed my hand against my injured side, feeling the broken bones shift slightly under my touch. A secret pain. A silent honor. If you've ever had to smile while carrying a heavy burden that no one else can see, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, what is one sacrifice you've made that your family never understood? Type, I am strong, if you know your worth doesn't come from their approval. They don't need to know, I whispered to the wind, repeating the mantra that kept me sane. As long as they're safe, that's enough. But as I looked at Kyle, who was now chugging his third beer and getting louder by the minute, a darker thought crept in. They were safe from the world, yes. But were they safe from themselves? Were they safe from the hubris that was growing like a cancer in the center of this party? I had a feeling the safety was about to be shattered. And unlike my ribs, this break wouldn't heal quietly. The sun was lower now, painting the Virginia sky in bruised purples and oranges, but the party showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the alcohol had turned up the volume. The air was thick with the smell of cheap cologne mixed with barbecue smoke, a combination that was starting to give me a headache behind my eyes. I was leaning against the railing of the deck, swirling the melting ice in my cup of water, trying to blend into the woodwork. It was a skill I had perfected over years of undercover work, becoming gray, becoming forgettable. But forgettable wasn't on Kyle's agenda today. He spotted me from across the patio. I saw his eyes lock onto me, glossy and slightly unfocused from his fourth, or maybe fifth, Bud Light. He grinned, a predator who had just spotted a limping gazelle, and started weaving through the crowd toward me. Hey, there she is, Kyle bellowed, slinging an arm around my shoulders. His weight was heavy, oppressive, and he smelled like stale hops and sweat. The family's very own paper pusher. He squeezed my shoulder hard, his fingers digging into the muscle. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, letting him play his game. So Shiloh, he slurred slightly, leaning in close, his breath hot on my face. I was just telling Uncle Bob about the difference between us real warriors and the POGs. You know what a POG is, right? I knew exactly what it meant. Person other than grunt. It was the derogatory term infantrymen used for anyone who wasn't on the front lines, cooks, mechanics, administrative clerks. In his eyes, that's all I was, a POG. a fobbit who never left the safety of the forward operating base. I've heard the term, I said evenly, taking a sip of my water. Yeah, well, you're the definition of it. Kyle laughed, looking around for an audience. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bob were chuckling, eager to be part of the joke. See, while guys like me are out there, Oscar Mike, that means on the mission, by the way. You guys are just sitting back, enjoying the Wi-Fi and the chow hall. My eye twitched. Just once. Oscar Mike meant on the move. It came from the phonetic alphabet, O for Oscar, M for Mike. It didn't mean on the mission. Any boot fresh out of training should know that. But here he was, butchering the lingo to impress civilians who didn't know a rifle from a rake. Sounds intense, Kyle, I said, my voice flat. Intense? You have no idea, he scoffed, puffing out his chest. You have to have your head on a swivel, constant vigilance. You never know where the threat is coming from. Constant vigilance. I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, the cousin I had grown up with vanished. In his place was a tactical problem, a threat assessment. My brain switched gears effortlessly, slipping into the cold, analytical mode that had kept me alive in places Kyle couldn't find on a map. Target, male, approx. 180 lbs, intoxicated, balance compromised. I scanned his stance. He was leaning heavily on his left leg, his right foot crossed over his ankle in a casual, arrogant pose. If I were to sweep his left knee, just a quick, sharp kick to the perineal nerve, he would drop like a sack of cement. Defense, 0. His hands were occupied, one holding a beer, the other gesturing wildly in the air. His chin was jutting out, completely exposed. His jugular vein was pulsing beneath the skin of his neck, a perfect, inviting target. Analysis, amateur. If this were a bar in Kandahar or a back alley in Beirut, he wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds. He had no situational awareness. He had let an enemy, me, get within striking distance without assessing my hands or my posture. He was loud. He was visible. He was a walking casualty. If this was a war zone, Kyle, I thought, the words echoing loudly in my skull, you'd be dead 10 times over before you even dropped your beer. You listening to me, Shiloh? Kyle poked me in the chest with a finger. I said, you wouldn't last a day in my boots. The poke was the trigger. It was a small physical aggression, harmless in a family setting. But my body didn't know we were at a barbecue. My body remembered the rules of engagement. Contact front, react. For a split second, the world slowed down. My hand tightened around the plastic cup of ice water. The plastic crunched loudly, buckling under the sudden pressure of my grip. My knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my muscle memory screamed at me to move. Step in, trap the arm, strike the throat, neutralize. It would take less than 2 seconds. I could envision it perfectly. The look of shock on his face as his airway collapsed. The sound of the beer can hitting the patio pavers. The silence that would follow. I took a sharp breath, forcing the violence back down into the dark box where I kept it. I released the tension in my hand, though the cup was now permanently deformed. I'm listening, Kyle, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm just taking it all in. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Grandpa Jim. He was still in his lawn chair under the oak tree, but he was no longer looking at the grill. He was looking directly at me. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were sharp and clear. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at my hands. He saw the crushed cup. He saw the shift in my stance, the way I had subtly bladed my body away from Kyle, protecting my center line, ready to strike. He knew. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. A soldier's nod. Stand down, Marine. Not here, not yet. The connection broke as Kyle let out a loud belch, slapping his stomach. Anyway, he announced, bored with tormenting me since I wasn't fighting back. I need a refill. This civilian beer goes down like water. You want anything, Pog? Are you good with your whatever that is? I'm good, I said. He rolled his eyes, turning his back on me completely. Another tactical error. And sauntered off toward the cooler, shouting for Uncle Bob to toss him a cold one. I let out a long, shaky exhale. The adrenaline was still humming in my veins, a low-voltage buzz that made my fingertips tingle. I looked down at the mangled cup in my hand. Ice water dripped onto my shoes, cold and sobering. I had been tested, and I had held the line. But as I watched Kyle high-five another relative, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear, I realized something terrifying. The restraint was fraying. The mask was slipping. I wasn't sure how much longer I could play the part of the meek, useless cousin, not when the hero was begging to be taught a lesson. I tossed the ruined cup into the trash can. It hit the bottom with a hollow thud. 1 more hour, I told myself. Just survive 1 more hour. But the sun was setting and the shadows were getting longer. And in the dark, monsters tend to come out to play. I just hoped Kyle realized before it was too late that he wasn't the monster in this story. He was the prey. The shadows under the oak tree were deep and cool, a sanctuary from the glaring artificial lights that had just flickered on around the patio. Kyle had wandered back over, drawn not by interest but by the need to have an audience for his beer-fueled bravado. He stood swaying slightly, holding a fresh can of Bud Light, looking down at Grandpa Jim. "So, Grandpa," Kyle slurred, his voice too loud for the quiet corner of the yard. "You were in Nam, right? That must have been wild." "Lot of action? Like Full Metal Jacket style?" He grinned, expecting a war story full of explosions and heroism, something that would validate his own fantasies of combat. Grandpa Jim didn't look up immediately. He took a slow drag from a cigarette he wasn't supposed to be smoking, doctor's orders, and exhaled a thin stream of blue smoke into the humid air. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like tires crunching on gravel. "It wasn't a movie, son," Jim said softly. "It was wet. It rained for 3 weeks straight in '68. Your boots rotted on your feet. You didn't see the enemy. You just heard the jungle moving. And you smelled it. The rot. The damp earth." He paused, his eyes drifting to a place none of us could see. "I lost my best friend, Miller, because he lit a cigarette at the wrong time. Just a flash. Then, gone." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with the ghosts of men who never came home. I felt a tightness in my chest, a familiar ache of shared understanding. I knew that smell. I knew that sudden, violent loss. Kyle blinked, clearly bored. The adrenaline-pumping story he wanted hadn't materialized. "Yeah, well," Kyle interrupted, stifling a yawn and checking his phone. "Sounds pretty depressing, honestly. Not really the vibe for a party, you know? I'm gonna go grab another cold one. Aunt Linda made those jalapeno poppers." He turned on his heel without a second glance, leaving the old man and his trauma alone in the dark. I watched him go, feeling a surge of disgust so potent it tasted like bile. He treated a veteran's pain like bad entertainment. I didn't move. I stayed right where I was, leaning against the rough bark of the oak tree. Grandpa Jim took another drag, ash falling onto his faded jeans. "He doesn't get it," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. "He's a tourist," Jim replied, tapping ash off his cigarette. "He bought the t-shirt, but he hasn't paid the admission price." He reached into the pocket of his denim jacket and pulled out a silver flask. It was battered, dented in one corner, the metal worn smooth by decades of handling. He unscrewed the cap with trembling fingers. "Cup," he commanded gently. I held out my plastic cup. It was empty now, just a few drops of warm water at the bottom. He tipped the flask, pouring a generous measure of amber liquid. The smell hit me instantly. Peat, smoke, and oak. Good Scotch, single malt, probably older than Kyle. "Drink," he said. "It'll put some iron in your blood. Better than that horse piss the boy is drinking." I took a sip. It burned pleasantly on the way down, a warm fire settling in my stomach. It tasted like history. Like respect. "Thanks, Grandpa." He capped the flask and put it away. Then he turned in his chair, shifting his body so he was facing me directly. His milky eyes narrowed, scanning me with an intensity that made me want to check my own perimeter. "Your shoulder," he said. It wasn't a question. "Is it healing?" I froze. The glass of scotch stopped halfway to my mouth. I hadn't touched my shoulder. I hadn't winced. I hadn't favored it. At least, I didn't think I had. I don't know what you mean, I stammered, the lie clumsy on my tongue. Jim scoffed, a dry rattling sound. Don't bullshit a bullshitter, Shiloh. I saw you flinch when you lifted that case of soda earlier. Just a twitch in the jaw. And you're guarding your right side. You walk like you're carrying a pack, balancing the weight. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Shrapnel? Or did you take a hit? I stared at him, my defenses crumbling. For 10 years, I had fooled my mother. I had fooled my aunts. I had fooled everyone in this suburban masquerade, but I couldn't fool him. Game recognizes game. Fall, I whispered, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. Broken ribs, 3 weeks ago. He nodded slowly, absorbing the intel. There was no pity in his eyes, only recognition. The look one wolf gives another across the pack. Rough terrain? Rough enough? And the family thinks you're typing invoices. It's better that way, I said, looking toward the house where the laughter was getting louder, more raucous. Mom, she needs to believe I'm safe. She needs to believe I'm boring. If she knew the truth, it would break her. Jim snorted. Your mother is brittle, Shiloh. She breaks if the wind blows the wrong way. But you? He reached out, his calloused, papery hand covering mine where it rested on the arm of his chair. His grip was surprisingly strong. You're made of different stuff. You're tougher than steel, kid. Steel bends. You don't. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, sudden and hot. I blinked them away furiously. I hadn't cried when I broke my ribs. I hadn't cried when the medic set them. But hearing this old man, this forgotten warrior, see me, truly see me, cracked something open inside my chest. I feel like I'm disappearing sometimes, I confessed, my voice barely audible over the chirping crickets. Like Shiloh is just a ghost, and the only real thing is the mission. The mission ends, Jim said firmly. The war ends, even if it takes a lifetime. But you gotta survive the peace, Shiloh. That's the hardest part. Surviving the peace among people who don't know the cost of it. He took a swig from his flask, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You're not a ghost, he added. You're the only real thing in this whole damn zip code. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our scotch, two soldiers from different wars finding a common frequency in the static of civilian life. It was the most peaceful I had felt in months. But the peace was fragile. A loud crash from the patio shattered the moment, glass breaking, laughter that sounded more like braying. I looked up. Kyle was standing on top of a cooler, swaying dangerously, holding a fresh beer high in the air like a trophy. He was shouting something about combat maneuvers. Grandpa Jim followed my gaze. His expression hardened, the warmth vanishing instantly. His eyes went cold, the eyes of a man who had seen villages burn. Watch him, Jim murmured, his voice low and dangerous. He's just drunk, I said, trying to dismiss the unease crawling up my spine. No, Jim said, shaking his head slowly. He's not just drunk. He's weak, and he's scared. He knows he's a fraud deep down. And a scared man with something to prove is the most dangerous thing on earth. He squeezed my hand one last time, a warning grip. Be ready, Shiloh, he whispered. The dog that barks the loudest is usually the one that's about to bite. And when he snaps, don't you dare hold back. I looked at Kyle, really looked at him, and saw the frantic energy in his movements, the desperate need for validation that was spiraling out of control. Grandpa Jim was right. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And I was the only one with an umbrella made of steel. The warning from Grandpa Jim hung in the air like ozone before a thunderstorm. The dog that barks the loudest is usually the one that's about to bite. It didn't take long for the bite to come. Kyle was bored. The adrenaline from his war stories had faded, replaced by the sloppy, aggressive buzz of too much cheap beer. He was prowling the patio, looking for a target, something to assert his dominance over now that the old man had dismissed him. His eyes landed on Leo. My nephew Leo was 12 years old, a quiet kid with messy hair and glasses slightly too big for his face. He was sitting on the edge of a planter box, engrossed in a video game on his phone, trying to make himself as invisible as I usually did. He was the family's punching bag, too sensitive, too artistic, not interested in football or hunting. "Hey, Leo," Kyle shouted, his voice slurring. "Get your nose out of that screen, boy." Leo flinched, looking up with wide, startled eyes. "I'm just playing, Kyle." "Playing?" Kyle sneered, stomping over to him. "You're rotting your brain. You need to learn some real skills. Get up." Before Leo could react, Kyle grabbed him by the back of his t-shirt and hauled him to his feet. Leo stumbled, dropping his phone onto the concrete. The screen cracked. "Hey!" Leo cried out, reaching for it. "My phone!" "Forget the phone," Kyle barked, spinning the boy around. "I'm gonna teach you some MC MAP, Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. You need to know how to defend yourself, or you're gonna get eaten alive in high school." The family laughed. Uncle Bob, who was filming on his own phone, chuckled. "Yeah, teach him a lesson, Kyle. Toughen him up." My stomach tightened. This wasn't a lesson. This was bullying disguised as tough love. "Okay, look," Kyle announced to his captive audience. "First thing you gotta know is how to escape a headlock. Come here." He wrapped his thick, sweaty arm around Leo's neck. It wasn't a playful hold. He clamped down hard, bearing the boy's head into his armpit. Leo yelped, his hands clawing at Kyle's forearm. "Ow! Kyle, stop! It hurts!" Leo's voice was thin and panicked. "It's supposed to hurt." Kyle laughed, tightening his grip. "Pain is weakness leaving the body, remember? Now try to break it. Come on, use your hips." Leo was flailing now. His face was turning red. His feet scrabbled against the patio stones. He wasn't learning anything. He was being choked by a drunk 22-year-old who didn't know his own strength or didn't care. "Kyle, let him go," I said from the shadows, my voice low. But the noise of the party drowned me out. "Look at him," Aunt Linda giggled, sipping her wine. "He's like a little fish on a hook." "Mom!" Leo screamed, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, help me!" I looked at my sister-in-law, Leo's mother. She was standing next to my mom, holding a plate of brownies. She looked uncomfortable, but she didn't move. She looked at my mother for cues, and my mother, Janet, the matriarch, just smiled that tight, superior smile. "Oh, stop crying, Leo," she said, her voice cutting through the boy's sobs. "Don't be such a baby. Kyle is just playing. You need to learn to be a man. Let your cousin teach you something useful for once. Learn to be a man." The words hit me like a physical blow. The cruelty of it, the absolute willful blindness. They were watching a child be terrified, be hurt, and they were calling it education. They were calling it masculinity. Leo's struggles were getting weaker. His eyes were wide with terror, darting around the circle of smiling adult faces, looking for a savior and finding only an audience. And in that look, the backyard vanished. Suddenly, I wasn't in Virginia anymore. I was in a dusty village in Idlib. The smell of charcoal became the smell of burning tires. The sound of country music became the ringing in my ears after an explosion. And Leo's face, it became the face of a boy I had pulled from the rubble 3 years ago. A boy who had looked at me with that same desperate, pleading terror. "Help me." My vision tunneled. The edges of the world went gray. The only thing in color, the only thing that mattered, was the threat and the victim. The mask of Shiloh. The secretary dissolved. The armor of the meek daughter shattered. I didn't think. I didn't decide. The training took over. I set my plastic cup down on the small table beside Grandpa Jim. The movement was precise, deliberate. Grandpa Jim didn't try to stop me. He just sat back, his eyes hard, and whispered one word. "Go." I stepped out from under the oak tree. My movements were fluid, devoid of the clumsy hesitation I usually faked. I crossed the grass in 3 long strides, closing the distance to the patio. The air around me seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Kyle!" I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I used the voice I reserved for the field, the command voice. It was a tone that bypassed the conscious brain and struck directly at the primal instinct to obey. It was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of fear. The laughter died instantly. Uncle Bob lowered his phone. Aunt Linda froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Kyle stopped squeezing, but he didn't let go. He turned his head, his eyes glassy and confused, trying to locate the source of the sound that had just cut through his drunken haze. He saw me standing there, 10 feet away. My hands were empty, hanging loose at my sides. My posture was relaxed, but it was the relaxation of a coiled snake. "What did you say?" Kyle sneered, trying to regain his bravado, but his voice wavered. I repeated, each word landing like a hammer strike. "Let the boy go." "Or what?" Kyle laughed, though it sounded forced. He tightened his grip on Leo again, making the boy whimper. "You gonna file a complaint against me, Shiloh? Gonna write me up?" My mother stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Shiloh, get back inside. Don't you dare ruin this party with your drama. Kyle is just having fun." "This isn't fun," I said, my eyes never leaving Kyle's face. I didn't even look at her. "He's hurting him, and he's going to stop. Now." "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Kyle spat, his ego flaring up, overriding any sense of self-preservation. He shoved Leo away from him. The boy crumbled to the ground, coughing and clutching his throat. "You're nothing. You're a nobody." Kyle turned fully toward me, his chest heaving, his fists clenching. He took a step forward, entering my personal space. He loomed over me, using his height, using his bulk, trying to intimidate the little cousin. "You want to play soldier, Shiloh?" he growled, spit flying from his lips. "Come on then, make me stop." He raised his hands in a sloppy fighting stance. I looked at his hands. I looked at his feet. I looked at the exposed line of his jaw. Grandpa Jim was right. The dog had snapped. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't going to walk away. "Your choice, Kyle," I whispered, so only he could hear. "But you're not going to like how this ends." The silence in the yard was absolute. Even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for the secretary to retreat. Waiting for the mother to yell. Waiting for the hero to win. They were all wrong. Because the hero wasn't the one standing tall. The hero was the one about to bring him to his knees. Kyle didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He reacted with the brute force of a wounded ego. "You bitch!" he screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure, drunken rage. He lowered his shoulder and charged. It was a classic high school football tackle, clumsy, telegraphed, and completely reliant on mass. He intended to drive me into the dirt, to use his 200 pounds to crush the little secretary who dared to question him. To him, I was just a speed bump. But to me, he was moving in slow motion. My world narrowed down to geometry and physics. The noise of the party, my mother's gasp, Leo's whimper, the country music, faded into a dull hum. My heart rate didn't spike, it steadied. This was the place where I lived. This was the flow. Threat vector incoming. Center mass, velocity, moderate. I didn't step back. Retreating would give him momentum. I didn't step forward. Engaging head-on would be a contest of strength, and he was bigger. So, I disappeared. Just as Kyle was about to make contact, just as he thought he had me, I pivoted. My left foot slid back into the side in a smooth arc, my body turning 90 degrees like a closing door. Kyle hit nothing but air. But I didn't just let him miss. I helped him. As he lunged past me, stumbling forward under his own unchecked inertia, my right hand shot out. I didn't strike him, I guided him. I placed my palm flat against his shoulder blade and shoved, adding my force to his. "Whoa!" Kyle yelped, his feet tangling as he tried to regain his balance. He was falling forward, exposing his back. The cardinal sin of combat. Target exposed, execute. I moved in. My body flowed like water, closing the gap instantly. I kicked the back of his knee, a sharp, precise strike to the popliteal fossa. His leg buckled. He dropped to his knees with a grunt, his momentum arrested, but his balance destroyed. Before he could even process that he was on the ground, I was on him. I wrapped my left arm around his neck from behind. It wasn't a hug. It was a vice. My bicep pressed against the right side of his neck. My forearm bone dug into the left. I grabbed my own right bicep with my left hand, locking the hold. My right hand moved behind his head, pushing it forward, cinching the noose tight. The rear naked choke. The meta leão. The lion killer. It wasn't about cutting off his air. That takes too long, and they fight too hard. It was about blood. I compressed his carotid arteries, the highways delivering oxygen to his brain. Kyle thrashed. He clawed at my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin, desperate and wild. He tried to throw himself backward to slam me onto the concrete. But I had already hooked my legs around his waist, grapevining his legs, flattening my hips against his back. I was a backpack he couldn't take off. "Stop!" someone screamed. Maybe my mother. Maybe Linda. It didn't matter. I leaned in close to Kyle's ear. He was making gurgling noises now, his panic escalating as his vision started to tunnel. "General Mattis said something you should have learned in boot camp, Kyle," I whispered, my voice calm, almost intimate amidst the violence. "Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet." I tightened the grip by a fraction of an inch. "You forgot the plan," I murmured. "And you forgot the professionalism." His thrashing slowed. His movements became jerky, uncoordinated. His brain was starving. The lights were flickering in the house. Carotid arteries compressed, I counted down in my head, syncing with the fading rhythm of his struggle. Hypoxia setting in. 3, 2, 1. Kyle's arms dropped. His body went limp, all the tension leaving him in a sudden rush. He was heavy, just dead weight in my arms. I held him for one more second to be sure, muscle memory from ensuring a target was neutralized. Then I released the lock. I unhooked my legs and stood up, letting him slump forward onto the grass. He lay there, face down, snoring softly, the sound of his body trying to reboot. I took a step back. I looked down at my hands, steady, not a tremor. I reached up and adjusted my glasses, which had slid slightly down my nose during the scuffle. I smoothed the front of my cardigan. I checked my pulse mentally. 65 beats per minute, a resting rate. Then, I looked up. The scene was frozen. It was a tableau of absolute shock. My mother stood with her hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Uncle Bob was still holding his phone, but his arm hung limp at his side. Aunt Linda looked like she was about to faint. Even Grandpa Jim looked surprised. Not that I had won, but at the efficiency of it. He raised his flask in a silent salute, a grim smile playing on his lips. Silence. The kind of silence that follows a gunshot. They were looking at me, but they weren't seeing Shiloh the secretary anymore. They were seeing a stranger. A stranger who had just dismantled their golden child in 6 seconds flat without breaking a sweat. I looked at Leo. The boy was still sitting on the ground where Kyle had shoved him, staring at me with awe. He wasn't scared of me. He was looking at me like I was a superhero who had just taken off her disguise. I winked at him. Then I turned my gaze to my mother. She took an involuntary step back, fear flashing in her eyes. Fear of her own daughter. "He'll wake up in a minute," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet yard like a razor blade. "He'll have a headache and a bruised ego, but he'll live." I looked down at Kyle one last time. He looked so small now, so harmless. Just a boy who played a game he didn't understand. "Next time," I said to the unconscious heap, "don't mistake silence for weakness." If you felt that justice in your bones, hit the like button right now. And tell me in the comments, have you ever shocked everyone by showing your true strength? Type underestimated if you know exactly how satisfying this moment feels. The spell broke. Aunt Linda let out a piercing shriek that shattered the stillness. "He's dead. She killed him. Oh my God, she killed him." The chaos I had held back finally flooded in. But I stood in the center of the storm, calm and untouched. I had crossed the line. I had revealed the monster. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care who saw it. Aunt Linda's scream was still ringing in the humid air, piercing and hysterical, drawing neighbors to their windows 2 houses down. "Call the police!" she shrieked, dropping to her knees beside Kyle's prone form. She hovered over him, her hands fluttering uselessly around his face, checking for injuries that weren't there. "Bob!" Call 911. She's crazy. She tried to kill him. The patio, which had been a stage for Kyle's arrogance just moments ago, was now a scene of utter bedlam. Uncle Bob was fumbling with his phone, his face pale, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't dial. He was too scared to move, too scared to provoke the woman who had just dropped a Marine in 6 seconds. Kyle groaned, rolling onto his side. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound, and clutched his throat. The color was returning to his face, replacing the ghostly pallor of hypoxia. "He's alive," I said flatly, not moving an inch. "He's fine. He just took a nap." "You shut up," Aunt Sarah yelled from the safety of the sliding glass door. "You animal, look what you did to him." My mother, Janet, finally found her voice. She marched toward me, her face contorted into a mask of pure venom. I had seen her angry before, when I got a C in math, when I didn't make the cheerleading squad, when I missed church. But this was hatred. She stopped 2 feet from me and shoved my shoulder. It was a weak, frantic push that barely rocked me back on my heels, but the intent was violent. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, spit flying from her lips. "Are you insane? Are you on drugs?" "He was hurting Leo," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with her frenzy. I pointed to where my nephew was still sitting on the ground, rubbing his bruised neck, looking at the adults with wide, confused eyes. "Did you all miss that part? He was choking a 12-year-old. "He was playing," my mother screamed, her voice cracking. "They were boys roughhousing, but you attacked him. You could have snapped his neck." "I controlled every movement, Mom. If I wanted to snap his neck, he wouldn't be coughing right now." The words left my mouth before I could filter them, cold and factual. My mother recoiled as if I had slapped her. She looked at me with genuine horror, not at the violence, but at the capability. At the stranger standing in her daughter's skin. "You're jealous," she spat, shaking her head as if trying to rearrange reality to fit her narrative. "That's what this is. You're jealous of Kyle. You're jealous that he's a hero, and you're nothing. You're jealous that he has a life, a future, and you're just a bitter, lonely spinster. You wanted to humiliate him." I stared at her. The accusation was so absurd, so detached from reality, that I almost laughed. "I'm jealous," I repeated quietly. "Mom, look at him." Kyle was sitting up now, supported by Aunt Linda. He looked disoriented, rubbing his throat, his eyes darting around with fear. He wouldn't look at me. The bravado was gone, replaced by the shame of a bully who got checked. "He's a drunk kid who doesn't know the first thing about combat," I continued. "And you're all clapping for him like he's Captain America while he abuses a child." "Don't you dare talk about him like that," Aunt Linda yelled, cradling Kyle's head. "He serves this country. He protects people like you." "He doesn't protect anyone," a gravelly voice cut through the noise. Grandpa Jim stood up from his chair. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his presence filled the yard. He walked over to where the family was huddled around Kyle, casting a long shadow over them. "The girl is right," Jim said, his voice low but thundering with authority. "The boy was out of line. He was hurting the kid. Shiloh stopped it. You should be thanking her." "Dad, stay out of this," my mother snapped, turning on her own father. "You're senile. You don't know what you're seeing. She assaulted him." "I know a soldier when I see one," Jim growled, thumping his cane on the patio stones. "And I know a coward when I see one. Kyle is the coward. And you lot." He swept his gaze over the family, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You're a bunch of blind fools." "That's enough," Uncle Bob shouted, finally finding his courage now that the target was an old man. "Jim, sit down. Janet is right. Shiloh is dangerous. Look at her. She's standing there like a psychopath. No remorse, no tears." I looked around the circle of faces. My mother, my aunts, my uncle. They were all looking at me with the same expression, fear and loathing. They didn't care about Leo. I glanced at the boy. He had crawled away to the edge of the grass, forgotten by his own parents in their rush to comfort the aggressor. They didn't care about right or wrong. They cared about the narrative. In their story, Kyle was the golden child, the hero, the future. I was the scapegoat, the failure, the background noise. By taking Kyle down, I hadn't just hurt him physically, I had shattered their carefully constructed fantasy. I had proven that their hero was weak and their failure was powerful. And that was unforgivable. "You need help, Shiloh," my mother said, her voice dropping to a cold, dismissive tone. "You need professional help. I don't know where you learned those things, but it's not normal. It's sick." "It's training, Mom," I said, feeling the last tether of attachment snap inside my chest. "It's what keeps you safe at night. But you don't want to know that. You prefer the fairy tale." "Get out," she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Get out of my house," she said louder, pointing a trembling finger at the gate. "Leave. Before Bob calls the sheriff. I don't want you here. You're not the daughter I raised." I looked at her. I looked at the woman whose approval I'd chased for 32 years. The woman whose criticism had driven me to push myself harder, to become elite, to become lethal, just to prove I was worth something. And I realized with a clarity that was both heartbreaking and liberating that I would never be enough for her. Not because I lacked value, but because she lacked the capacity to see it. "You're right, Mom," I said softly. "I'm not the daughter you raised. That girl died a long time ago in a desert you couldn't find on a map." I turned to Grandpa Jim. He gave me a sad, knowing nod. "Go," his eyes said. "Save yourself." Then I looked at Leo. "You okay, bud?" He nodded, sniffling, clutching his phone. "Thank you, Aunt Shiloh." "Keep your head up," I told him. "Don't let them break you." I didn't look at Kyle. He wasn't worth the eye contact. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the accusations, the gaslighting, the toxic loyalty to a lie. I walked toward the sliding glass door to get my purse, my steps steady and rhythmic. Behind me, the babble of voices started up again, comforting Kyle, vilifying me, rewriting history in real time. But their voices sounded distant now, like static on a radio channel I was tuning out. I was done. The mission here was scrubbed. It was time to extract. The interior of the house was cool and quiet, a jarring contrast to the heat and hysteria of the backyard. It felt like a museum of a family I didn't belong to. I walked through the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. On the walls, framed photos smiled back at me. Kyle in his football uniform, my sister at her wedding, my mother receiving a garden club award. There were no pictures of me. Not really. Just a blurry group shot from a Christmas 5 years ago where I was standing in the back, half obscured by a Christmas tree. I reached the foyer table where I had left my purse. I checked my essentials automatically. Keys, wallet, sunglasses, check, check, check. I was ready to leave. I was ready to never come back. But as I reached for the brass doorknob, a hand slammed against the wood, holding the door shut. I didn't flinch. I turned slowly to find my mother standing there. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and desperation. She looked small suddenly, small and petty. "You're not leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "Watch me," I replied, my tone even. "You're going to go back out there," she hissed, pointing toward the patio door where the muffled sounds of Aunt Linda's wailing could still be heard. "And you are going to apologize to Kyle. You're going to tell everyone that you snapped, that you're on medication, that you're sorry." I looked at her, truly looked at her for what felt like the first time. I saw the fear behind her eyes, not fear for Kyle, but fear for her image, fear that the perfect suburban facade was cracking, and I was the hammer. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, louder this time. "I'm not apologizing for stopping a bully, and I'm certainly not going to lie to protect your ego." "My ego?" she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I am trying to save your reputation, Shiloh. Do you know what they're going to say about you? That you're unstable, that you're violent, that you're a loose cannon. No man is ever going to want you after this." There it was again. The ultimate currency in her world, a husband. As if my entire existence, my entire worth, hinged on whether or not someone wanted to marry me. I don't care what they say, Mom, I said, stepping closer to her. I loomed over her slightly, not with physical threat, but with the sheer weight of my presence. And I don't care about finding a man to validate me. You're pathetic, she sneered, falling back on her old weapons. You're a glorified secretary, Shiloh. You file papers. You answer phones. You live in a tiny apartment and you have nothing. Kyle is a Marine. He is elite. You should be on your knees begging for his forgiveness. Something inside me finally snapped. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive click. The lock on the door to my secret life turned. You think I file papers? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream. I know you do, she scoffed. That's all you're good for. I leaned in, invading her personal space until I was inches from her face. I let the mask drop completely. I let her see the eyes that had stared down warlords. I let her feel the cold radiation of a predator. That logistics company in D.C., I said softly. It doesn't exist, Mom. It's a front, a shell corporation for the intelligence support activity. Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I don't type invoices, I continued, relentless. I hunt people, bad people, people who make Kyle's drill instructors look like kindergarten teachers. I speak 3 dialects of Arabic. I have a clearance level you don't even know exists. And those scars you think are ugly? I got them dragging a teammate out of a burning building in Aleppo while you were asleep in your comfortable bed. She took a step back, hitting the wall. She looked terrified. You're lying, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Believe what you want, I said, straightening up and adjusting my purse strap. But know this. I am not the failure of this family. I am the shield that protects it. I reached for the doorknob again. This time, she didn't stop me. She couldn't. She was paralyzed by the sudden, massive shift in power dynamics. But before I opened the door, I turned back to her one last time. I needed to leave her with something she would never forget. Something that would burn every time she looked at her precious, fragile nephew. You know, Mom, I said, a sad smile playing on my lips. You always told me you wanted me to marry a strong man, someone capable, someone dangerous. I gestured around the silent, empty hallway, encompassing the backyard, the men drinking beer, the boys playing soldier. It's a shame, I said, my voice heavy with finality. Because in this entire house, the strongest man is me. I opened the door and walked out. The humid air hit me again, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel oppressive. It felt like freedom. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I saw movement at the side gate. Grandpa Jim was standing there, leaning on the fence. He wasn't smiling, but he raised 2 fingers to his brow in a casual salute. Give him hell, kid, he mouthed. And behind him, peeking through the slats of the fence, was Leo. He gave me a small, shy wave. I waved back, got into my car, and locked the doors. The sound of the locks engaging was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. It was the sound of a boundary being set in stone. I started the engine. The radio came on, resuming the podcast I had paused hours ago. The host was talking about extraction strategies, about knowing when a position is compromised and when it's time to leave. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I didn't look at the house. I didn't look at the window where I knew my mother was watching. I looked at the road ahead. I drove past the rows of manicured lawns and American flags. I drove until the suburbs faded into the highway. I drove until the sun finally set, leaving the world in darkness. But I wasn't afraid of the dark. The dark was where I did my best work. And for the first time in a long time, I was heading home. Not to the house I grew up in, but to the life I had built. A life where strength was respected, silence was a virtue, and family was earned, not inherited. 6 months later. The air inside the SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, was filtered, recycled, and kept at a constant 68 degrees. It smelled of ozone, gun oil, and high-grade coffee. It was a stark contrast to the humid, emotionally suffocating backyard in Virginia, and I preferred it this way. Here, the walls were soundproof. Here, there were no windows to look out of and no prying eyes to look in. I stood at a metal workbench, stripping down my Glock 19. My hands moved with a rhythmic, practiced efficiency, checking the slide, the spring, the barrel. Click, clack, snap. It was a meditation. Boss? I didn't look up immediately. I finished reassembling the weapon, racked the slide once to ensure it was seated, and holstered it on my hip. Status, Miller? I asked, turning to face the man standing in the doorway. Miller was 6'4", a former linebacker from Texas with hands the size of dinner plates and a beard that violated at least 3 different grooming standards. He was a Tier 1 operator, a man who could clear a room of hostiles in under 4 seconds. And he was looking at me with the kind of deference usually reserved for generals or saints. Bird is fueled and prepped, ma'am, Miller said, his voice a low rumble. Wheels up in 10. Intel says the package is moving tonight. Good, I said, grabbing my plate carrier from the bench. Tell the team to gear up. We go dark in 5. Roger that. He lingered for a second, watching me check the straps on my Kevlar vest. You good, boss? He asked, not out of doubt, but out of loyalty. You've been running hot lately. I paused, looking at him. In this room, surrounded by lethal professionals, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the spinster. I was the asset. I was the leader. I'm good, Miller, I said, offering him a rare, genuine smile. Just focused. Get to the chopper. He grinned and disappeared down the hallway. I had 5 minutes before I had to surrender my personal electronics and vanish from the grid. I walked over to my locker, a gray metal box with my call sign, Wraith, stenciled on the front. Inside, sitting on the top shelf next to a spare magazine, was my personal iPhone. I hadn't touched it in 12 hours. I picked it up, the screen illuminating my face in the dim light. One new notification. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew the number. I hadn't deleted it, but I hadn't answered it either. It was Kyle. I swiped open the message. It was long, a wall of text sent at 2 a.m., likely fueled by insomnia and regret. Shiloh, it read. I know you probably won't read this. Mom told us not to contact you. But I had to say something. I leaned against the locker, feeling the cold metal through my tactical shirt. Uncle Bob sent me the Ring doorbell footage from the BBQ. I watched it. I watched it like 50 times. I slowed it down. I could picture him sitting in his barracks room or his parents' basement, hunched over a laptop, frame by framing the moment his world turned upside down. I saw what you did with your feet, the pivot, the weight transfer, and the choke. You didn't just grab me, you locked it. That wasn't self-defense class stuff. That was operator level. I scrolled down. I asked around. Some guys I know in Intel. They wouldn't tell me anything, but the way they shut up when I mentioned your name. Jesus, Shiloh. Who are you? A ghost, I thought. I'm the ghost you were too loud to hear. I'm sorry about Leo. The message continued. I was drunk, yeah, but that's no excuse. I was being a bully. You were right. Grandpa Jim was right. I felt small, and I wanted to feel big. I'm sorry I made you leave. If you ever want to talk, or teach me how to not get my ass kicked in 6 seconds, let me know. I stared at the words. 6 months ago, this message would have meant everything to me. It would have been the vindication I craved. It would have been the proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the villain. But now, it just felt quiet. It was an echo from a life I'd already shed, like a skin I had outgrown. I didn't feel angry at Kyle anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a distant, detached pity. He was finally seeing me, yes, but he was seeing the cool part, the violence, the skill. He still didn't know me. He didn't know the nights I spent awake, the weight of the decisions I made, the cost of the silence I kept. And he never would. Because he hadn't earned that clearance. My thumb moved to the top of the screen. I didn't type a reply. I didn't type, I forgive you. I didn't type, go to hell. I tapped edit. Then, select message. Then, the trash can icon. Delete conversation? This action cannot be undone. I pressed delete. The message vanished. The screen went blank. It was that simple. No drama, no tears, just a digital cleaning of house. I didn't need his apology to validate my worth. I didn't need my mother's approval to define my strength. I had found my validation in the field, in the trust of men like Miller, in the quiet knowledge that when the world caught fire, I was the one holding the hose. I tossed the phone onto the shelf and slammed the locker shut. The sound echoed in the empty room like a gavel striking a block. Case closed. I put on my helmet, adjusting the night vision goggles until they clicked into place. I checked my radio frequency. I pulled on my gloves. The woman who craved acceptance at a barbecue in Virginia was gone. In her place stood Wraith. I walked out of the SIF and into the hallway, the heavy steel door sealing behind me with a pneumatic hiss. The corridor was long and lit by red emergency lights. At the end of it, the tarmac waited. The mission waited. I wasn't lonely. Solitude is a state of isolation. Aloneness is a state of being. I was alone, yes, but I was whole. As I walked toward the roar of the waiting helicopter, I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth saving. Everything I needed was right here, strapped to my chest and standing by my side. It was Oscar Mike, and I had work to do. The tarmac was alive with the scent of jet fuel and the deafening roar of rotors cutting through the night air. It was a chaotic symphony of power, but to me, it sounded like a lullaby. I walked toward the waiting MH-60 Blackhawk, the wind whipping my hair around my face. I didn't fight it. I let the rotor scour me clean, stripping away the last lingering doubts of the girl who used to apologize for existing. Miller was already inside, sitting near the door gunner position. He extended a gloved hand to pull me up. "Welcome aboard, boss," he shouted over the noise, his grip firm and reassuring. I hauled myself into the cabin and took my seat. Around me, the rest of the team was strapping in. There was Sanchez, checking the feed on his drone tablet. There was Davis, double-checking his medical kit. And there was Miller, giving a thumbs up to the pilot. I looked at their faces. They were tired. They were scarred. They were cynical and crude and dangerous. They didn't care about my relationship status. They didn't care about my fashion choices. They didn't care if I was ladylike. They only cared about one thing. Could I do the job? Could I bring them home? And the answer, written in the trust in their eyes, was yes. For 32 years, I had been told that family was about blood, that it was about shared DNA, shared last names, and shared Thanksgiving dinners where you swallowed insults along with the turkey. I had been told that you forgive family no matter what because they're all you have. I looked at Miller, who had once taken a bullet in the vest meant for me in Somalia. I looked at Sanchez, who had spent 3 days digging through rubble with me after an earthquake in Haiti, refusing to sleep until we found survivors. I realized the lie I had been fed. Blood is just biology. It's an accident of birth. It makes you related. It doesn't make you family. Family is the people who know the worst parts of you and stay anyway. Family is the people who would bleed for you, not the ones who make you bleed. Family is loyalty. It is earned day by day in the trenches of life. The pilot's voice crackled in my headset. "Wraith, we are green across the board. Ready for lift?" I pressed the transmit button on my chest rig. "Copy that. Let's fly." The helicopter lurched upward, defying gravity. The ground fell away. The base, with its fences and lights, shrank into a grid of geometry. As we climbed higher, banking toward the east where the first hint of dawn was bleeding into the sky, my mind drifted back to Virginia one last time. Not to the house, or my mother, or Kyle. They were fading now, becoming small and insignificant, like characters in a book I had finished reading. I thought of Grandpa Jim. I pictured him sitting on his porch, nursing a cup of coffee and maybe sneaking a cigarette. He was the only thread I hadn't cut. He was the bridge between my two worlds. He understood that sometimes you have to leave the people you love to save the person you are. I reached into my pocket and touched the small silver St. Christopher medal he had pressed into my hand the day I graduated from selection. "Safe travels," he had said. "Protect the flock. I was protecting the flock. My flock. The sun broke the horizon, a brilliant line of gold that set the clouds on fire. It bathed the cabin in warm amber light. It reflected off the visors of my team, turning them into faceless angels of war. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the thin, cold air. The pain in my ribs was a distant memory. The ache in my heart was gone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to be happy. I wasn't waiting for approval to be strong. I looked out at the endless horizon, at the world waiting below. It was dangerous, it was messy, it was beautiful. And I was ready for it. A smile touched my lips. Not the polite, practiced smile of Shiloh the secretary, but the fierce, wild smile of Wraith. I am Shiloh Kinney. I am a warrior. I am a leader. And as the Black Hawk cut through the morning sky, carrying me toward the mission and the men who would die for me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't running away. I was finally home. We all carry scars that our families can't see. If my story resonated with you today, it's because you know the truth. Silence isn't weakness, it's discipline. And you don't owe your loyalty to anyone who treats you like you're invisible. Real family is earned. If you are ready to stop apologizing and start living on your own terms, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are building a squad of survivors here, and I want you in it. And tell me in the comments below, who is the Grandpa Jim in your life? The one person who always believed in you when no one else did? Let's honor them today. Stay safe, stay strong. This is Shiloh, signing off.